Okay, for the next part of this lesson, we're going to look at creating a layout for our lineup design. So at the moment I've got this image popping up with a reflection, and I really want to be able to move this around as a whole. At the moment, if I click and move it, the parts are not connected. So I want one object that drives this whole thing, and it's going to be the main image itself. And I'm going to use the parent feature for that. So I'm going to select the gradient ramp, which is also acting as a matte, and I'm going to select the reflection image as well. And I'm going to parent them to the main image. So there's my parent panel open. If it's not open, just click on this button here. And if you still don't see it, you can right click on the bar here, go to columns, and make sure that parent is checked. So to parent these layers to that one, I'm going to click on the drop down and select the layer that I want to be the parent. And now the reflection moves around with it. So I can start to, say, just move this up a little bit, center it, and then move it over so I've got some space for my text. Next, I'm going to click the horizontal type tool and start inputting text. So my main title is going to be Tonight. Now it's a little bit hard to see against this background color that I've chosen. So what I want to do is I want kind of a lighter shade on this side, but a darker shade on this side. And I'm going to create a gradient ramp for the background. So with the background solid selected here, I'm going to right click and go to Effect, Generate, and Gradient Ramp. If you're using After Effects CS6, I believe this tool is still called just Ramp. So you might look out for just Ramp, but if you're using CC, it's called Gradient Ramp. And same as before, I get the same black to white gradient with grays in between. And I want to pick for my end color, I think the same pale blue. And then for the start color of my ramp, I want kind of like a purplish color. You know what, maybe my end color is not blue enough, so I'll just kind of beef that up a bit. That looks pretty good. And then I want it to go from left to right. So I'm going to use the start of ramp and end of ramp parameters over here. You can move these by dragging the numbers, or in your comp view here, you can click and drag the little crosshair to where you want the ramp to start and begin. Sorry, start and end. The end of the ramp is just under this little square here. Maybe that's a little bit purple. I'll just turn it down a bit. But yeah, I can tweak this later. So here's my main title, Tonight. I'm just going to pick a nice bold font and scale it up. Notice that I've also got this font is italic, so I'm going to use italic just for the word tonight. And then underneath that I want the details for the program. So tell you what, I might just click on my text layer here and press Command D or Control D if you're on a PC, and just move that down. So it's just duplicated the layer. And I'm going to rename this one to the title of the show, which is Black Books. And this obviously needs to be quite a bit smaller. So I'll just bring the text size down here. And I might make it a little bit lighter. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Then I'm going to duplicate this layer once more, drag it down, double click on it to edit it. And this is going to be the time for the show. So let's say the show starts at 7:30, and quite often, in fact probably always, you'll have to include a age restriction or a rating. So let's say this one is, I don't know, PG-13. And just to differentiate these, I'm going to make this type slightly different as well. So perhaps I'll make it lighter, like that. So they just stand out a little bit from each other. And also, I'm going to make this text a little bit smaller once more. So I've got a nice hierarchy of information here. I've got tonight, which is the most important thing, the name of the show, which is second most important, and then finally the small details, what time, and the age restriction. And I'm just going to move these into place, like so. So my layout is getting there. There's something else I might do to this little block of text to set it apart from tonight, and also kind of balance the weighting of it, because tonight is quite big and bold, and the details, although finer, they're quite important too. So I might just set them apart by putting a block of color behind them, which I'm going to animate sliding out behind the picture. So I can do this with a shape, I can do it with a solid, there's many different ways to do it. I'm just going to use a rectangle shape. Make sure I've got no layers selected, otherwise it's going to draw a mask. And I'm just going to draw a shape roughly where that text is. And I'll just click and drag the layer behind my text. And I think I want this to extend off the edge of the screen, so it's a big, just one strip. One of the things you need to bear in mind is that sometimes you'll have titles with really long titles, and they're not going to fit into your block. So I'm just extending this all the way to the edge of the screen to allow extra space for titles that are quite long. I also want this actually to be behind my picture, so I'll just drag it right down to the bottom. In fact, I'll just take all the text and drag it underneath the image elements. And I just want to start refining exactly where these bits of text sit. So the word tonight, it's kind of nice if it lines up with the top of the image, but there's a big space here, so I'm just going to increase the size and bring it down. Maybe just grab my shape and open that up a bit so that the spacing between the elements is just a bit more consistent. That's looking alright. Then I've got this pale blue color for the strip behind the text, which is white, so I might make the text for this block a darker color so that it stands out more against the pale blue. So with these two elements selected, I'm going to come over here to my character panel and just choose a different color. I might just use my picker here to grab the same hue and then just make it darker. So that's looking alright. Okay, so I've got some of my elements sort of in where I want them to be in relation to each other, but in terms of the entire composition, it's sort of a little bit up and to the left, so I kind of want to move everything. So I want to select the main image and the text parts and the shape. I don't want to select the parts that are parented here, because they're going to move with the main image regardless. And I'm just going to grab these pieces and move them over and down to kind of try and center everything, more or less. I think probably my title can be slightly larger, so I'll just grab the corner of that, also holding the Shift key so it doesn't squash. And I can just make that a little bit bigger. And this element down here as well. Make that a touch bigger and move it down. Okay, so finally I want to take my image here and rotate it so it's kind of skewed, kind of leaning towards us to create a little bit of depth in my design. What I'm going to do is to make it a 3D layer. This is something we're going to cover in greater depth later on, but for now, if you want to make a layer 3D, you select the layer and you click underneath this little cube here and you check that checkbox. And what this does is it allows you to move and rotate this layer in 3D space. So now I can, with the rotate tool selected, I can rotate it around like that. But the other layers are not following, and that's because they are not 3D layers. They should follow because they're parented, but because they're not 3D, they can't rotate in that space. So I need to make the other two layers 3D as well, and they will then rotate with it. So I've given it, I've given it a little bit of an angle there. And just want to zoom in. There's a tiny space here between my color strip, so I'm just going to scale that up so it goes right behind there. And I just want to make sure that everything's lined up in a grid kind of fashion. So I'm going to go to View and Show Rulers, and I can drag from these rulers guidelines. So I'm going to say line the text up with that line there. So I'll just select my text and slide it over. This one needs to move down a little bit more. I just want to line it up with that point there. I can probably get rid of my ruler now. I mean, I could probably leave it there in case I want to use it again, but it's just getting in the way, so I'll move it. So another way that you can check how centered things are and how well they're lined up with each other is by coming down here to the bottom of the composition view and clicking this button here, clicking and holding it, and you can turn on title/action safe or proportional grid. Title safe is going to give you these frames which give you an idea of where your text should be so it doesn't get cut off from the screen. Basically anything outside this line here is going to get cut off. But it also kind of gives you a better idea of where things are in relation to the center of the composition. So at this point I can just go and select some of my elements and perhaps bring them down a little bit here to get everything more or less center. And vertically it's good. The other option is proportional grid, which cuts your composition up into little squares, which is also quite useful for just aligning things. Okay, so there my elements are laid out the way I want them to be. The next step is to go and animate these in and out, and then duplicate this whole design twice more to create comps for the other two shows that are going to be in my lineup.